Hey everybody, welcome back to Pushing Film. My name's Hashim, and today I want to talk about a new product called the Essential Film Holder. This is a film holder for scanning your film if you're using a DSLR and macro lens type of setup, or a mirrorless camera and macro lens, so that you can hold your negatives perfectly flat as you scan them. Until now, as you may have seen in my previous video called Intro to DSLR Scanning, I've been using just this simple 35mm 6-frame holder by Pacific Image, which has served me quite well. It's really simple, straightforward, and cheap, but it can be quite slow scanning with this method where you can only load one strip at a time, and it can be time consuming loading the strip in, clamping it, making sure it's straight each time you scan that strip of frames. Also, that only does 35mm, so when I was scanning 120, I had to use my Xpan V800 120 holders, which in a similar way only do one strip at a time. They're a bit slow, they don't hold the negatives perfectly flat. So I've been really excited about this product, and I think it's really well designed. I've been doing some extensive testing, so I've got heaps of comparisons loaded up on my computer here on Lightroom to show you later. So I've got a lot to cover in this video, and because of that, I've left some timestamps at the bottom of the video if you want to go ahead and skip to any particular section. I've tried to categorize it into different parts of the video, but I definitely recommend sticking around for this first part of the video to begin with, where I'm going to go over what it is, how it works, and some of the more essential information like that. And then you can sort of either watch through or feel free to go to any particular section. So the Essential Film Holder is a product designed by a gentleman named Andrew Clifford, based over in the UK. He designed this product to solve the problem for himself, a lot of other problems that I'm sure other people who digitize film at home have been facing, including myself. And he eventually worked on the product, updated it. There's been a few iterations. It's up to version 3 now, and it's been released to the public, and it's already been selling worldwide. So the way it works is that you have a light diffusion panel at the bottom, which sits above your light source. Then you have a different mask on top of that. Either you can have a 120 mask, you can have the 35mm mask, which is actually on top, so you don't need to remove the 120 mask if you're scanning 35mm. You can just have one or the other. The Essential Film Holder comes in the option to just get 35mm or to just get the 120 versions. And there's also a lot of additional masks you can get, such as the Xpan mask for scanning panoramic 35mm frames. You can get masks that allow you to scan film with the border. So in the case of 35mm, that lets you include the sprockets, or in the case of 120, that actually lets you include the border of the 120 film with the information, like, you know, the word Kodak or whatever it is. If you're interested in doing that, I know a lot of people are, you can actually get the mask that lets you include the border. And the way it works is that you feed the film through from one end of the mask that you're using, and then you feed the film through as you go along and take a photo of each frame with your camera. So it's really quite simple. That's the beauty of it, but it is very effective in the way that it works. I can already see it saving me a lot of time when it comes to digitizing film at home. It encourages me more to want to scan my own film rather than use the flatbed. What I used to do is often just batch scan my black and white film, especially in the flatbed, because it's a lot quicker than using methods where you're loading one strip at a time. The beauty of this is that you can still do one strip at a time if you like. It is still going to be faster, and it's going to be more flat and give you a better digitization of your film. So it is really versatile in that sense. I love that aspect of simplicity and that it allows me to use it in the way that I want. The other great thing about this, especially compared to some of the other products on the market, is the price. So it ranges between 70 and 90 British pounds for the kit, depending on if you want just the 35mm mask or the 120, or if you want both. You also can pay extra for the additional masks, like the Xpan one I mentioned. There's one for mounted slides, and there's those borderless options. So it is really adaptable to your own needs. So it definitely represents great value for money, especially when you compare it to some of the more expensive options out there on the market, like some of the copy boxes and the film carrier by Negative Supply. When you receive the Essential Film Holder, it comes in a nice cotton bag, which you can use to keep the masks safe when you're not using them. The construction is really nice. It's all laser cut plastics, nothing that's going to scratch your film. It's got plastic threaded posts and wing nuts, and a really smart system for keeping your film flat as it feeds through. So a really well designed product overall. So I'm sure everyone wants to see some scans that I've made with this product. And I've got Adobe Lightroom loaded up here with some of the sample test scans that I've done. And if you have a look here, there's a few repeats. I've tried to color code them all. And the first comparison I want to show is the scan made with the Essential Film Holder on this 35mm negative, which was Portra 160, up against its toughest opponent, which is going to be a high resolution lab scan. The lab scan is on a Fuji Frontier SP3000. It's the highest res that the SP3000 does, which is about 3600 by 5400 pixels. The scan made on the Essential Film Holder with my Canon 5D Mark IV and the 100mm macro lens was initially a higher resolution than that Frontier scan, but I downsized it to match up with the Frontier scan just so it was an even playing field. And you can see that the negative is obviously lying completely flat because the scan is sharp. And when you look at them in the center, there's not a huge difference, but I can actually see that the DSLR scan is sharper. This is something I've already established in the past. And the more important thing is that if we go to the edges of the image, you can see that the Essential Film Holder has held the negative completely flat to the edges, even more so than the mask or possibly just the way the scans come up on the Frontier. So it's done a really good job of holding the negative flat, and all the images that I'm showing you have been converted with Negative Lab Pro. I know there are other options, but that's what I like using, especially the latest version of NLP works really well. All right, so the next comparison is between the scan made with the Essential Film Holder and using the Lomography Digitalizer 35mm holder instead, just to test that difference between how well it's held the film. So if we zoom into the center of the image, you can see that there's probably not much noticeable difference there. There's a bit of difference in the color and tonality, but more importantly, again, if we move to the outside edge of the image off to the right, you can see that big difference in sharpness towards the edge because the negative on the digitalizer unfortunately doesn't really hold quite completely flat. So in terms of the scan quality, the Essential Film Holder is definitely a win over the Lomo digitalizer. The other advantage is that the Essential Film Holder does not have a tendency to scratch the film the way you do load it into the digitalizer. However, I find that it is prone to getting more dust and scratches, and you can already see up here that there's a lot more debris on the digitalizer because it has to make contact with that stainless steel piece, and then the mask also involves clamping it down with another piece on top, and there's a lot of contact with the actual surface of the negative, which I am not a fan of. I prefer to try and keep as much contact away from the negative as I can, which is a great thing about using the Essential Film Holder. All right, so you can already see from that one quick comparison, that 35mm negative, that we know this works quite well, holds a negative flat. It does give you a good scan. It does give you nice even light. So I thought I'd break a bit from those examples and talk about some of the formats you can scan with this. So I mentioned some of them earlier, but when it comes to scanning 120, the great thing about this is that you can scan 6:9, 6:7, 6:6, 6:45, so all those 120 formats. So because of that ability, I thought I would next jump into some examples of different 120 scans that I made, including 6:7 and 6:45, because I shoot both of those. Let's jump in again and look at some scans I made of some 120 film. So starting off with just a quick example of a low-res lab scan of a shot taken on Fuji 400H. So I downsized the camera scan again to match that low-res lab scan made on the Frontier, and you can see that the scan made on with the Essential Film Holder has come up perfectly, sharp and flat and all the way to the edges. You actually get a bit more information when you're using the EFH because it lets you scan closer to the borders than what you would typically get with a lab scan. And the other advantage, on a side note, is that you can see less artifacts on the scan that I made with my camera as opposed to the low-res lab scan, which you can see artifacts, especially near those letters on the stop sign. You may not be able to see it on your end of the screen because of YouTube compression, but a lot of this you'll probably have to take my word for. So let's look at another frame. So this time we're looking at a high-res lab scan made on a Fuji Frontier as well, and up against the scan made with the Essential Film Holder. Again, because my 5D does 34 megapixels, I downsized the camera scan to match the high-res output of the Frontier. And looking at them both here, again converted with Negative Lab Pro, you can see that the sharpness is quite good on both of them, but there is still a slight edge for the scan made on the camera. Not a huge difference, but again, what I'm looking for is to see that the essential film holder is holding the film flat and evenly all the way to the edges, which it definitely is. You can see here on that little welcome sign that if anything, it looks a little bit sharper on the scan made with the essential film holder, but that could be because it's just sharper overall. But looking at the image zoomed out, you can see everything looks flat and even, and that's exactly what I'm looking for in these examples that I'm showing you guys. All right, so this time we're going to look at a 645 negative, but I want to put it against more than just the lab scan. We've established that the essential film holder can hold its own in terms of that film flatness compared to a typical lab scan from a machine like the Frontier. So looking at that first, we've got the lab scan and the one I made with the essential film holder. In terms of sharpness, it's obviously completely flat once again. This does seem a lot sharper on the end of the essential film holder scan for whatever reason. The other beauty on this other side note is that the dynamic range with the scan made on the DSLR is better. If you look at that rust detail just above the Chrysler line there's a lot more dynamic range in the camera scan, and you can see it again just down here on this blue crate where there's a lot more shadow detail, and yet the highlights hold up just as well. And the other thing I want to look for again is the sharpness all the way to the edge compared to the lab scan. Again, holds its own really well. You can see it is probably a little bit sharper on the edge where that rope is. All right, so what we want to know now is how does this hold up against a different holder like the Epson V800 holders, which I mentioned earlier. So I've got a scan made with EFH up against one using the Epson holder, but using the DSLR to scan it. So I've got the film in the Epson holder, still scanned with the same method, DSLR Negative Lab Pro, but you can see because of that presence of the clear plastic sheet on the Epson holder and the fact that it doesn't hold it anywhere near as flat, there is a huge difference here now between these two scans. So needless to say, this is going to work a lot better than using those flatbed film holders. And this really highlights, how much better of a result you can get using, camera scanning of your film compared to a method like that. And another thing that I wanted to compare it to while we're on this Epson holder topic is how would it have compared to actually scanning it in the flatbed. So now I've got it up against the scan made in the actual Epson V800, scanned as a positive, converted using Negative Lab Pro, following the proper methods recommended through NLP, using the TIFF prep plugin, and then converting it using the Negative Lab Pro plugin. And if anything, this result is even worse because it hasn't used the DSLR at all. The Epson flatbed scan is a lot softer, muddier, lacking detail. Dynamic range is decent, but especially here towards the edges, you can see that the sharpness and just the overall scan is almost like comparing chocolate and shit in these cases, because you don't really see it when it's zoomed out. But definitely when you zoom in, you can see a big difference there. And even in terms of the color that I've gotten out of using the scan from the flatbed, it converted better when using the DSLR scan here. So definitely worlds apart in terms of that comparison. But I think I'm pretty good for comparisons on that front. So what I wanted to do is show you a different set of images. So this is a note on the importance of the light source you're using with home DSLR digitization of your film, whether it's using the essential film holder or a different film holder. This really was to highlight the importance and the difference of output when you use different light sources, such as different video lights and LEDs and things like that. So the first frame you're seeing on the left is the lab scan. Again, it's a high-res Frontier scan. So the next one over is the scan made with the essential film holder using my Viltrox LED video light. Third one over is the same setup, essential film holder, but this time using the Logan 4x5 light pad that I had been using all the way up until now. You're going to see a huge difference in color here, and this is important because the Logan light pad that I use, when I looked it up, I found out that the CRI rating of that light pad is below 90. I think it was 80 something. And what that results in is some unusual color shifts, especially in the shadows there. The lack of saturation in the warm tones is something that I had always struggled with up until getting this new video light. And it just really hammered that point home in doing this testing, that light source that I had been using all this time was not the most ideal, and it definitely affected the output that I was getting out of Negative Lab Pro. So especially with some certain films like Fuji stocks, I had to find myself correcting the reds a lot. And you can see here the reds just don't look as good, the warm tones of the table. And that was the reason that I had eventually invested in a different video light, mainly for the purpose of doing my home scanning with. I thought I'd throw another LED light into the mix. So the last one I have here is a small video light by Falcon Eyes, which I've mentioned in a previous video. It's a lot better than the Logan light pad. It does say it has a CRI rating of around 95, but it does also exhibit a bit of a weird color shift. The reds don't look quite as good as either the LabScan or the one used with the Viltrox light. So I've done a bit of research into all the different options for lighting in terms of doing home digitization, and I definitely recommend going for a decent video light with a bright output and a high CRI rating, something with 95 plus. So I've got some links in the description of this video to the Viltrox light that I use and some of the other options. You'll find that a lot of them overlap each other. They use a lot of different generic names, and sometimes the Viltrox one is the exact same as the Relino light. There's a bunch of links in the description. Check them out, but definitely look into the light source you're using. You can use something like an iPad or iPhone. iPads are meant to have a really good white light output when you use them as a source. And the great thing about Essential Film Holder is it's going to diffuse the light as best as possible. But if your light doesn't have a good color referencing index to begin with, you're not going to be helping the color output of your scans at all. If you're doing black and white, it's not going to matter, but definitely look into the light source you're using if you're planning on doing a lot of home digitization, especially color negative film. And I thought I'd include that section in this video just so that if you've been getting weird results with your home scanning, like I was for the longest time, sometimes it's something as simple as the light source you're using. All right, so let's jump back to the grid of photos, and what we have left here is just a couple of Xpan images. I thought I'd demonstrate the Xpan mask. Andrew was nice enough to include the Xpan mask with the sample pack that he sent me. So just comparing these two, I've got the scan made with the Essential Film Holder Xpan mask, and on the other side I have one just made with the Epson V800 scanned in the actual flatbed scanner using the Epson scan software. And this here was actually an image made with my Pentax 6.7 using a 35mm film adapter to be able to shoot panoramic images in that camera. I actually made a whole video about that process. If you're interested in how I did that, I'll put a link to that video as well. And as I scroll around this image, you can see that obviously, as expected, the scan made with the DSLR and Essential Film Holder is showing up sharper than the other scan, which was made on the Epson V800 with the standard holders for that. Now the film used was HP5 shot at 1600, so it is quite grainy, and that's where you can really see some of that sharpness difference, is especially here off to the left edge on this fence. It is clearly sharper on the DSLR scan using the film holder. And just the last couple of images I wanted to demonstrate are the ability to scan slide film, which in the case of unmounted slide film, I have a frame of 645, 120 film, so a frame shot on 645 camera, Fuji Velvia 50, and this is just scanned using the standard 120 mask in the EFH. Scans perfectly well when it comes to slide. There's not much to say here. You don't need to do any inversion, so you just simply take a photo of the frame. And more importantly, in the case of mounted slides, if you're looking to scan a lot of mounted slides, there is a mask for 35mm mounted slides, which are used to scan this frame here, a photo taken by Sarah on her last trip to Japan. And once again, it works perfectly well. I found it easy to load slides into that mask, which is simply a case of slotting them in on top. It lines up perfectly well. The light shines through exactly where you want it, and I got a nice decent scan of this 35mm slide. Which again, without even really needing to show, you can assume that this is a better scan and sharper than what you would get out of the flatbed scanner. Alright guys, so we've looked at a lot of samples there. Definitely impressed with the output that I've been getting from this product. It's clearly better than any of the other film holding solutions that I've tried up until this point. So in terms of my workflow, this is definitely going to be the new standard for what I use in terms of holding film. And I really love that it's going to allow me to just go through and do uncut rolls. Because I develop all of my own black and white film, I love that I'm going to be able to just put through entire uncut rolls, scan them before I cut and sleeve them. And even now with the lockdown that we have here, all of our labs are closed. So I've been developing all my own color film as well. And it's really great to know that I have this to be able to really supplement my workflow in terms of scanning color film, make it a lot quicker, easier, especially with the newest version of Negative Lab Pro. I'm loving the color output that I'm getting from it. It's matching what I get out of lab scans with the advantage of having more control, dynamic range. So I'm really happy that this product eventually came out, that Andrew was able to send me a copy for review. I'm really impressed, and this is definitely one of the most worthwhile updates to my home scanning workflow. So in terms of my entire workflow with scanning, I made a video previous to this one called Intro to DSLR Scanning. Now that I have a newer light, a newer holder, I've got the newest version of Negative Lab Pro, which has been updated a few times since me making that initial video. I definitely plan to make an updated video on my entire scanning workflow, including all of these new tools. There was already enough to go through in this video, just sort of introducing and testing the EFH. So I think it would be better for me to make an updated video of my entire scanning workflow in a separate video for later. So talking about some of the pros and cons of the Essential Film Holder, I've already mentioned most of them in this video, mainly the things like the great light diffusion from that high quality light diffusion panel on the bottom of the setup, the aspect of flatness, getting that absolutely flat negative and how much it's going to help you get a sharp scan is really important, and the Essential Film Holder definitely achieves that, as you can see from all those tests that I showed you throughout the video. So speed is another big advantage, having the option to feed through entire uncut rolls of film that either you've scanned, or sometimes I get uncut film back from the lab, and it is good to be able to just rescan it. And now that I can use the EFH, I can get high-res scans from my home setup before cutting and sleeving the film. So that's another advantage in terms of speed. Even if you're still using strips, it's going to be faster on the EFH than loading it into other solutions like that Pacific image holder that I used to use before that. And the other great pro about this is just the simplicity and the adaptability, having the ability to have different masks in there and loading the 35mm on top of the 120. It's all really easy to use. The feeding system for the film and the acetate layer in the middle is a really smart design, especially on this version 3. The fact that you can get those additional holders like the Xpan mounted slide, the borderless options, and it's all just in one simple system that you can kind of build on as you go. So I really love that aspect of simplicity. There's nothing fancy about it, but it does the job exactly as I would want this kind of product to do, and it keeps costs down. So that's what I love about this, is great value for money. In terms of cons, it was really hard for me to find much. I mean, if anything, that aspect of simplicity might be the only drawback for some people. If you are looking for an auto feeding system or something like having wheels to feed your film through, I'm sure that's an option that would be nice, but it would have made the cost a lot higher. The other thing is that if you're handling film that is extremely curly, that's been left rolled up for a very long time, you might find that feeding it through, it's a little bit difficult to get it through to the other side of the aperture. But what I found is that if you have film that's that curly, it's probably good to reverse roll it and leave it to sit for a while before trying to scan it anyway, because if it is that curly, it's going to be difficult to load into any kind of holder. And the only other con I could think of is perhaps that it doesn't do 6x12 120 frames, which not many people do shoot, but I know that might be a thing for some, and also 4x5. However, that is something that probably could be addressed if Andrew does come up with those masks. I know it wouldn't be a very popular option for either of those two, but I was really reaching there to try and find some disadvantages of this product, because for the price, I do believe it's really good. And that's pretty much my pros and cons list. And there's a full guide on how to use this that Andrew has put up on his website. So it'd be easier for me to link that if you are thinking of getting this product and using it. So definitely read the how-to guide on Andrew's website. I'll have that linked in the description, and keep your eye out for that next video that I do on my entire scanning workflow. So in this last section of the video, I just want to touch on some of the alternatives to this product in case you're shopping around. Now, one of the things that I was asked about a lot is how would it compare to something like the Lomography Digitalizer? So as you can see from all those examples that I showed, it's definitely worlds apart in terms of flatness and convenience compared to the Lomo Digitalizer. And the beauty is that with the Lomography option, you're paying about the same amount, if not more, for getting the 35mm and 120 holders. And this definitely works a lot better. I mean, I've had those Lomo digitalizers for a while. I was actually intending to maybe make a review on them, but to be honest, I haven't been too happy with the results that I've been getting with them because of the difficulty in getting the film flat with either of the 120 or the 35mm holders. Now, compared to my previous recommendation of using just the simple film holders like this one from a scanner like the Pacific Image or PlusTech, this is still a really good option. This is going to be cheaper, but obviously that's just for 35mm. I'm not sure if a 120 version of something like this exists. This is going to hold your film flatter than something like the Lomo option, but probably not quite as flat as EFH, but I would still recommend that as the option if you want something cheaper. However, if you want to get through scanning your film a lot quicker and have the option to feed through either strips or even better, an entire uncut roll, I would definitely invest in a little bit more and getting something like the Essential Film Holder. There is also another product on the market called the Pixelator, which has only just come out. That's by Hamish Gill, who runs the website 35mmc. I mentioned him in some previous videos. I had been excited about the Pixelator for a very long time, ever since the Kickstarter came out more than a year ago. And I even had conversations with Hamish about getting a sample of the Pixelator. And unfortunately, he faced countless delays with that product. We even had another reach out for him to get my address to send one out, but things just got really complicated on that, and I felt like he has enough on his plate with that, so I haven't really tried that product or received any sample of it yet, but it is something that I'd be willing to try. So I can't really speak on any comparison between Pixelator and Essential Film Holder. From what I can see, there are definite advantages to this in the fact that it holds the film further away from the light source, keeps the light source further away from the mask, and has a definite advantage in flatness and ability to feed the whole entire uncut roll through, from what I can tell. So some of the other options that I haven't tried are a lot of the DIY or 3D printed film holders. From what I've seen, none of them offer the amount of versatility that you get with something like Essential Film Holder, especially given the price. And there's even some other more complex products called copy boxes, but they tend to be a lot more expensive and they have a light source built into them, which is adding to the cost. What I love about this is that you can just use it with your iPad or a video light that you might already have, and it has that versatility to get all those different masks. Now, the only thing that I feel like matches that level of versatility and speed that I've seen on the market is the film carriers by Negative Supply. Now, the only thing about those is that they are extremely expensive. So the way I see it, sure, getting the Negative Supply carrier is going to work better than this. It is going to allow you to feed the film through at an even higher speed. They're all made from complete metal, really highly engineered, but they cost between $400 and $800 US as far as I can see. And just looking at some of those prices on the website, I feel like that option is definitely out of my price range. I know it might be for a lot of you guys too, which is one of the reasons I was so excited about this coming out and really was keen to get my hands on one and try it. I would love to get something like the Negative Supply carrier, but I cannot justify that cost. And even if I was running a lab, I feel like that's a big investment because it's over $1,000 Australian just to get 35mm and 120 holders. They do seem to make really high quality products with a bunch of different attachments and bits and pieces. But for someone in my case, an enthusiast shooter who's doing a bit of scanning every now and then, this is definitely the better option. And I feel like it represents much better value for the money that you're paying. Feel free to let me know your experience, whether it's with other film holders, whether, 3D printed ones you've done yourself. What do you think of this? Have you used it? Would you be interested in investing in a system like this? I'm always looking for feedback on these videos and keen to hear what your thoughts are. So please feel free to share that here in the comments or even in the new Pushing Film Discord server, which I started recently. I'll put a link to that in the description of this video as well. All right, guys, so I think that covers everything I wanted to go through in this video. I know there was a lot, and I'm glad I did this testing because as far as I'm concerned, again, this is the best product for me and hopefully for a lot of you guys out there at the moment. I'm really glad that there's more options on the market for all us film shooters who are doing a DIY process at home. So I've included some links at the bottom of this video to Essential Film Holder, and also I've got some affiliate links to products that you might be interested in that I've mentioned, like some of those light pads. So using those links to make any of your purchases doesn't cost you any more, but it really helps me out and supports me in terms of making these YouTube videos and putting more content out there that hopefully is helpful to you guys. So if you do go ahead and use any of those links, I really appreciate it. So thanks for watching this video. I hope you found it helpful, and I'll see you on the next episode of Pushing Film.